Hi there. As of late, you've recently seen me make a lot of videos on how to play as Endymion, but what about going against an Endymion player? How do you tilt an Endymion player to the point where they can't really do much? And I'm here to show that. Here in the first replay, we have an example of how to use Ash Blossom successfully against a Endymion player. In case you didn't know, a lot of plays that Endymion players do is right off the bat. If you see Master Cerberus, this guy basically, you can pop him on the pendulum scale and search for a Jackal King, and then you pop Jackal King on the pendulum scale to summon this guy onto the pendulum scale. Now that was my original thought process, but as you can see, the opponent used Ash Blossom on it. Now, a lot of players don't really know when is the correct timing to use Ash Blossom. Usually, I've seen a lot of people as of late try to negate the activation effect of Master Cerberus when it hits the field. And if they do that and not destroy it, you can still activate the effect itself. Because when it hits the field, it's not actually activating its effect, if you know what I'm talking about. The effect actually happens as soon as you prompt it to. And this player over here understood that, so because of that, I wasn't actually able to do anything because of that. And the worst part of this is that Master Cerberus is stuck on the field. I can't really do anything to get rid of him. And so you're stuck with a scale 4, and that kind of sucks because the only way you can get rid of him is whether or not you use a card like Electromite, or you use some sort of card to get rid of things on the field like Twin Twisters if you run that, or perhaps maybe a Mighty Master popping effect. But nonetheless, my Bluff set down card didn't work, which sadly didn't fool anyone. And from here, I realized this guy was playing Numeron, which meant he can roll me over real quick. Now let me fast forward over here because obviously I can't do much here. Now, here's the next thing that kind of made me angry. So, of course, I want to try to get him. If you pay attention to the wording over here on Infinite Tracks, Mega Clops, it says that it's unaffected by monster effects other than Exceed, and it can't be destroyed, basically everything that has to do with Exceed. So my thought process was, okay, the guy let me have Master Cerberus onto the field. My next goal was to try to get this back to either the grave or to the extra deck, however that was. So ideally what I would have done is that I would have got Reflection out over here onto the scale, use Spell Power Mastery to try to get out Mighty Master, and then use all of those counters accumulated and use Mighty Master's effect to pop it, because it doesn't say that it can't be overrun by spells or traps. But as you can see, this guy had another Ash Blossom. Very good call, because now I'm basically stuck. I can't really do much. So that's one less spell counter for me to search for. And here's another one. I tried using this, and he had another one. So this guy was super lucky. Or maybe it was all skill. Very skill-based draw. And unfortunately, this is where I scoop. So definitely know when to use Ash Blossom. For Endymion decks, use it when Master Cerberus is on the field and it tries to use its effect. Obviously, also try to use it whenever you try to search for anything via Spell Power Mastery. Those are definitely the games that kind of hurts seeing Ash Blossom. Alright, so for this game, what we have here is a anti-meta deck that tries to do their best to limit the options of what an Endymion player can do. So, we take a look at their field right off the bat. They have the Fossil Dyna card on the field, and it basically prevents me from special summoning a lot of things. And so, special summoning is one thing that Endymion players heavily rely on. If this guy was, I want to say, just a tad bit higher in attack points, then I might have some trouble. Like, for instance, say if it was the Wind Barrier statue, then that would definitely put me at a disadvantage. And looking over here, this basically grants the equipped monster some extra attack. So, in addition to that, this guy played out the double cards, goes in match, and there can only be one. So I can only have one type of a monster on the field. So that would be, say, spellcaster, or hence whatever attribute, or not attribute, other type that might be. And this one's the attribute. So meaning up here, so light monster, dark, etc. So over here, the only option I can do is to start ramping up a lot of spell counters. And so my thought process was I had to get rid of that card so I can try to at least run this guy over. And that's what I am going to be doing with Magister. Over here, I'm just trying to get a lot of counters so I can thin out my deck, so I can get some good cards when I continue to draw. So now, as I'm attacking, I'm always wondering to myself, okay, what's that trap card? Could it be something that no one is expecting, like Magic Cylinder? Who knows? And here's another thing. Anti-meta decks, they bring a lot of surprises. One of the biggest things that puts Endymion players into a bit of a pickle is banishing. So if you banish some of the cards into the banish zone, I don't really have any resources to pull them out. So if you have any cards that allow you to do that, definitely go for that, because it will put me into a bit of a disadvantage. Unfortunately, my Magister, no matter where it gets sent, it can go back to the pendulum scale, which is exactly what I'm doing. So now, unlike Dyna, who has a 1200, I have to try to get rid of a 1600 with what I have over here. And I play Spiritualism, which is basically a way for me to bounce back one of the spells and traps that my opponent has back to their hand. And I kind of misplayed over here. Just ignore that. I didn't know that I couldn't get rid of Jackal because of the banishing effect over here. So, unfortunately for me, so I had to basically take the hit. And that's gone. I lost my Jackal. But I drew another Spiritualism, so there's that. I was able to pendulum summon my Jackal King. I got rid of that spell because I don't even know what that could have been. The person hasn't activated it so far, so I was able to run it over. And they pulled a Raigeki, of course. And I have no cards in my hand, so I can only rely on the pendulum and my extra deck zone. And of course, they get another Fossil onto the field, so I can't really use my extra deck now. So now it's all up to luck of the draw. I'm only speeding up this section just because even though they put out roadblocks for me to go against, I basically just ran over it using beatdown, so it was nothing special. Oh, so I hope that you understand why I sped through this. So even though I still won this game, this is still a very hard deck to go against. Mainly because if I didn't get the right draws, then I would have been eating dirt. So now we also have another thing that tilts a lot of Endymion players out there. Actually, not just Endymion players, but a lot of players out there. So As you can see, my opponent is playing True Draco, so they're setting down cards and getting ready to put their big plays by getting rid of their trap cards to summon out more True Dracos. So, my thought process was, looking at my hand, initially what I thought was I would try to have Mighty Master out onto the field via his pendulum effect, so that I would be able to pop everything, just in case if they had stuff that could negate. Now, my thought process right here, looking at Mighty Cerberus, was either I can try to pop their back row by getting rid of him and go into either a Garuda, which is the bird, and that can help me pop at least one of these hidden back rows, or I can go for a more offensive play, try to get rid of Master Cerberus to get out Jacko King. Jacko King turns into Master Cerberus onto the field, and then I can start ramping up a bunch of my spell cards and use Master Cerberus essentially as a spell counter bank. But as you can see, this didn't play out correctly. Alright, so this guy brought out True King's Return. And so keep in mind over here, if it goes into the grave, it can destroy one monster. So essentially True Draco has spells and traps that essentially pop other spells and traps and then activates their effect right here. So as you can see, I got out Jacko King and I'm going for that offensive play that I mentioned earlier. But I see that they use Skill Drain. So once Master Cerberus hits the field, I won't be able to use him as the spell counter bank, as I mentioned earlier, which is unfortunate. So I had to try to overpower it with beater sticks. And right here, I essentially was trying to thin out my deck and then start ramping up spell counters from the back row. Unfortunately, it's a bit slower because now I have to depend on Mighty Citadel or Magical Citadel, as well as whatever's on my pendulum scale. And over here, I was just testing to see if I'm able to pendulum summon some other things, and eventually try to work it out into some way for me to get out one more spell counter, because right here on my field at the moment I have 5 spell counters. That's just one less from Mighty Endymion. If this person didn't put out Skill Drain, I would have been able to ramp out Mighty Master onto the field a lot earlier and pop everything, but because they have Skill Drain, it's a bit unfortunate. So over here, I was thinking to myself, okay, so they're probably going to somehow get out a beat stick. So I wanted to try to get out a higher beat stick, which is my Borrelode Dragon. But I didn't think too well, and that led to my downfall right here. And essentially the rest of the game kind of played out into that favor of my opponent. If they played at least one spell card, I just needed one spell card, or I needed to draw one spell card, I would have been able to summon out Mighty Master. But unfortunately, this game didn't turn out too well for me. So GG to my opponent for playing True Draco. They played it well. I didn't pilot my deck too well over here, but sometimes whenever you lose games like these, you just have to reflect and look back on your replays and just think to yourself, how would I have been able to play this game a bit better? And that's pretty much it. I hope you now know how to tilt a Endymion player, and I hope that you definitely make my duels a bit less fun to play through. But realistically speaking, if you are able to play Endymions a lot, you kind of know by now that a lot of your decks that you're going to go against is going to run a lot of those meta cards, and so it's up to you to try to find a way to find out some creative solutions, like I mentioned earlier, in order to combat against that. So personally for me, I play with a lot of different variations of it. I usually test. Let's ignore this one. Again, as you can see, I play with a lot of different Endymion decks with little changes here and there. I add in one card, remove two, and then I take it into rank, because every win is a learning experience and every loss is a reflection on what I could have done to play better. See, everyone pilots their decks differently, and I like to think the same as me, but there's a lot of routes that you can play decks on, so how you end up getting that W is up to you. And that's pretty much it. I hope that you enjoy this tilting experience for me.